Welcome to the Trade Justice Power Hour. If you're here to learn more about the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity, you are in the right place. We have folks just a couple of seconds to trickle in from the waiting room, and then we will get started. It's looking like most people are in now, so we're going to take it away. So welcome again. My name is Arthur Stamoulis. I am the Executive Director of the Trade Justice Education Fund. Welcome to our monthly Power Hour briefing on how you can make a difference on important and timely trade policy issues. I appreciate you all being here. This month, we're going to be focusing in on the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity. And in a moment, I'm going to provide an overview on that and the current public comment period about it. Before we dive in, though, I do have two quick housekeeping items. The first is that this briefing is for grassroots activists and civil society organizations. It is not intended as a press call. So if you're a reporter, you're welcome to sit in, learn more about these issues on background. But I ask that you please not take up any space during the Q&A or discussion. I'm happy to talk with reporters offline later if you have questions. Second, those of you who attend these briefings frequently know that they're usually hosted by our organizing director, Hillary Hayden. I am filling in from Hillary today because she's getting married this weekend. We're extremely excited for Hillary, and I want to invite each of you to please join us in sending an online wedding card to Hillary that we're going to be sending her tomorrow. Clayton, I think, just pasted the link in the chat. I know she'll be touched by all of you signing, so please take a second, sign the card now, or at least open the link, have it ready to go in your browser after the call. I know we all appreciate Hillary's work, and we want to congratulate her on this awesome moment in her life. And with that, let me try sharing my screen, and we can get on to the main topic of the hour. Clayton, let me know if you can't see that okay, but I'm going to assume we're good to go. So our main presentation today is on the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity, which goes by its acronym APEP. And I'm going to take the next 25 minutes or so to cover what APEP is and isn't, what we're advocating for in terms of APEP, and what you can do to make a difference on this. And there should be plenty of time left at the end for any questions or discussion. So let's just start with the basics of how the US government describes APEP. The administration describes APEP as a space for ongoing discussion on how to deepen economic collaboration and integration in the Western Hemisphere. And they have three separate tracks for these APEP discussions. The first track is on foreign affairs, which is about identifying opportunities for countries to work together on things like workforce development, climate mitigation, migrant and refugee services, and things like that. The second track is on finance, which is about steering US development funds and private funding into projects in the region. And the third and final track, which is the one we focus the most on, is the trade track. And the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, describes the trade track as having two goals. Number one, promoting formal jobs that lead to decent work. And number two, promoting internationally recognized labor rights, environmental sustainability, and economic inclusion. And I should mention that there are currently 12 countries in APEP, the United States, plus Barbados, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Mexico, Panama, Peru, and Uruguay. And just this week, the APEP countries created a mechanism for allowing additional countries to join over time. Now, the Biden administration has made it very clear that APEP is not going to be another business as usual free trade agreement. There aren't going to be any of the tariff reductions or other market access offers that are a core part of past trade deals, part of trade deals that make it a lot easier for big corporations to ship jobs overseas to wherever workers are the most exploited, environmental regulations are the weakest. APEP also isn't going to have the other traditional corporate giveaways in chapters on investment, government procurement, intellectual property, digital trade. That means no expansion of investor-state dispute settlement or ISDS, no new limits on buy American, buy local, buy green, public purchasing preferences, no new monopoly rights for big pharma that jack up medicine costs, and at least for the time being, none of the giveaways that help big tech offshore digital economy jobs while restricting consumer privacy, data security, AI accountability, and antitrust regulations. So leaving all that crap out of APEP, that represents a shift in U.S. trade policy and a shift that we support, a shift that never would have happened without many of y'all's work on past trade fights like the TPP, the TRIPS waiver, digital trade and IPEF and other issues. You should be proud of that progress because that is progress you helped create. But if APEP isn't going to be a traditional free trade agreement, what is it going to be? And that's something I believe the administration and other APEP countries are actually still trying to figure out. Certainly corporations and their allies have been whining that APEP isn't a traditional FTA. They want market access offers. They want ISDS. They want binding rules for big pharma and big tech. And it's great that the Biden-Harris administration has told them no on that. No other administration has said no on all those corporate giveaways. But what will APEP contain? Right now, that's something that USTR is asking for the public to help them decide. And they're specifically asking for public comment on what APEP should contain in areas including labor standards and worker rights, the environment, climate, and conservation, supply chains for critical minerals, indigenous rights, and other issues. And again, this is a change, right? Like for those of us who've been doing this for a while, we weren't asked these questions under the Trump or the Obama or the Bush or the Clinton administrations. This is the first time that questions about labor interests and climate interests, for example, are being put at the center ahead of questions about business interests. Nonetheless, we need to be the ones that are helping answer those questions. There are a bunch of ways that these questions could be addressed, some of which are very positive, some of which are sort of neutral or fluff, and some of which are actually harmful. And what we don't want is to leave it to corporate lobbyists to answer these questions for us. Because trade policy is at a crossroads, and we need to be the ones setting its new direction. And another thing I should say at the outset is that for the Trade Justice Education Fund, we are weary of large-scale new trade deals. And most of our national and international partner organizations are also weary of new trade deals. And we're so weary of them that we don't really want APEP to become a full-fledged trade agreement in and of itself. And I don't think the administration wants that either. If I go back a couple of slides, to this list of the APEP countries, you see at the bottom of the slide there, those underlined countries are countries that the United States already has free trade agreements with. It is the majority of APEP countries. It is by far all of the biggest APEP economies we already have trade deals with. And to me, that means that we don't just, not need APEP to become another trade deal. And again, we don't want it to be one. Instead, what it also signals is that APEP is a chance to start fixing a lot of the problems that are already built into our existing trade deals in the area. I'll mention as an aside, the mandated US-Mexico-Canada agreement review process that begins next year and goes into 2026. That's also a major opportunity to fix problems in existing trade deals. And Trade Justice is going to talk a lot more about the USMCA review next year. But for now, APEP is also a major opportunity to start changing rules in existing trade deals because we've got the countries in the USMCA, the countries in the Peru, Panama, Colombia, Chile FTAs, a lot of the countries in CAFTA, now coming together, sitting together, talking about their trade relationships, let's talk about how to fix existing problems before creating new ones. Number one, we don't want to double down on existing problems by making APEP another new mega trade deal in and of itself. And number two, insofar as APEP trade talks do move towards actual agreements between countries, smaller deals about specific issues, let's use those talks to fix existing problems and to fill some of the glaring holes in agreements that are already out there. The mechanics of exactly how to do that on a technical level, like that's something that can be figured out over time by trade lawyers, other experts. Where we can be value added is by building public demand for things that APEP negotiators should be prioritizing. So what are some of those things that we think APEP negotiators should be discussing? So if you've been on these calls before, you've probably heard us talk multiple times about how existing trade pacts are being used to attack climate measures, to attack clean energy jobs programs, to undermine democracy overall. We've talked about the trade threats against the clean energy provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, an example of a state-to-state trade challenge that could be eliminated with a climate peace clause. We've talked about Ruby River Capital's billion-dollar trade case over an LNG permitting decision in Canada, an example of an investor-to-state trade challenge or ISDS case, which can be ended by getting ISDS out of existing trade deals. And so we and others have specifically called on APEP countries to adopt a climate peace clause, pledging not to use trade and investment agreements to challenge each other's clean energy and climate mitigation policies. And we and others have also called on APEP countries to create an APEP working group that's specifically tasked with eliminating ISDS from existing pacts in the region. If you're going to have all these countries coming together to talk about trade rules, let's start by getting existing rules out of the way of climate action and job creation. So that's an example of something we think APEP negotiators should be prioritizing. They should be talking about it when they meet in Ecuador next month, and it should continue to be a focus of their conversations until they actually reach deals in that area. What else? So obviously, we don't want corporations to continue exploiting workers, continue undercutting good-paying jobs throughout the Americas. And so we and others are also calling for any APEP agreements to include strong labor standards that are backed by swift and certain enforcement mechanisms. For years, trade deals in the Americas have been used to enforce things that corporations want. For instance, using trade deals to enforce patents for pharmaceutical companies, using trade deals to enforce copyrights for software companies. Well, let's apply those enforcement concepts that have worked so well for business interests, but instead prioritize the enforcement of labor and environmental standards for working people on the planet. So when we talk about labor standards, we're talking about internationally recognized standards on the right to organize a union, freedom from discrimination, freedom from forced labor, from child labor. For APEP especially, there should be special language on migrant rights. Within each APEP country, migrant workers deserve to have the same labor rights protections as citizens. And beyond just labor rights, the US also needs to take a much harder look at how existing trade deals like the USMCA and CAFTA drive migration in the first place and how that can be corrected. But back to labor rights, there need to be strong standards in place. And for any labor standards to be worth the paper that they're written on, we know they need to be coupled with strong ongoing enforcement mechanisms. And what we call for are facility-specific enforcement tools with meaningful penalties for violations. We don't want blanket penalties that punish entire countries for labor rights violations. Instead, we want the companies that are profiting from labor rights violations to be hit with penalties, because that's the only thing that's going to change their behavior. And along those lines, we recommend that the US partner with Mexico to educate other APEP countries on the advantages of this facility-specific labor model. These mechanisms have been in place within the USMCA for several years now, and something like 30,000 workers have benefited from these tools to get the unions of their choice recognized by employers for the first time. So we should be refining and expanding that system, and the US and Mexico should work together to lead the calls for that. Next, with USTR asking how APEP's trade track can advance climate and other environmental goals, we of course want to see any APEP agreements include strong, binding climate and other environmental standards. And like with labor, such standards need to be backed by effective, best-in-class enforcement tools. This is not rocket science. It's fairly straightforward stuff. The Biden administration is the first US administration to acknowledge climate change in trade negotiations, but we need to push it to be ambitious in this area. We want any agreements coming out of APEP to prioritize helping countries meet and exceed their Paris climate obligations as quickly as humanly possible. And we also want any agreements to help countries meet other obligations under other international environmental agreements. I should also mention that we've likewise called on the US to take a step back from advocating for so-called good regulatory practices requirements, which we view as a way of potentially helping corporations to delay, to weaken, or even to derail public interest policymaking abroad. Some of you attended the recent Power Hour briefing on critical mineral supply chains. That is also an area that USTR has specifically asked for public comment on. Briefly, critical minerals like lithium, nickel, cobalt, others are a key component of green energy technologies like batteries, solar panels, semiconductors. As such, how to get a hold of critical minerals is increasingly becoming a major focus of trade negotiations. Chile, Colombia, they have a lot of critical minerals. Argentina is looking to get into APEP. It has a lot of critical minerals. Insofar as APEP addresses critical minerals, and we think it will, we want it to do so in a way that promotes just and sustainable development, not rip and ship resource extraction. To be more just and sustainable, we want any deal to, number one, prioritize the inclusion of circularity, of reduce, reuse, recycling measures within supply chains, not just new mining in and of itself. We know that new mining is a part of the answer, but it's like 1/4 of the answer. We need to talk about ways to reduce, reuse, and recycle as well. Number two, any deal needs to develop good paying value chain jobs in both the United States and the countries from which minerals are being extracted and recovered. This needs to be a two-way reciprocal relationship. Number three, any deal needs to include strong, binding labor, environmental, indigenous rights, community engagement, and ownership transparency standards throughout the supply chain. And number four, of course, for those standards to be backed by strong enforcement mechanisms. So we have a whole presentation on critical minerals on our YouTube channel if folks want to take a deeper dive on that. But this is definitely going to be an area that we're going to need to follow within APEP. A couple more items. I mentioned earlier how a lot of existing free trade agreements in the Americas include monopoly protections for pharmaceutical companies. We saw during COVID just how unfair the rollout of vaccines and medications was, but it's not just COVID. Like virtually within every public health crisis, rich countries get access to life-saving medications first, and less affluent nations are often struggling to gain access. And the long-term solution here isn't the US and Europe donating their leftovers. What we need is to get existing trade rules out of the way so that countries in Latin America and around the world can start producing more medications for themselves. One easy step is to use the APEP trade track discussions to clarify and uphold nations' ability to use compulsory licensing for vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostic tools, other medical technologies that are needed to address existing and future public health emergencies. And for those who haven't heard of compulsory licenses before, compulsory licenses basically tell the companies that hold patents, that hold other monopoly rights over a medication, if you can't or won't make enough of this medication to sell them to our country in a timely and cost-effective manner, we're going to allow companies that will sell it in a timely and cost-effective manner to do that with or without your permission. Your monopoly protections are only going to go so far. You're still going to get paid, but you're not going to get to veto who makes these medications if you're not producing them in a timely and cost-effective way. We're going to start to prioritize public health first. These compulsory licenses were what was needed to finally start getting the AIDS crisis into check. But millions of lives were lost in the meantime, while countries duked it out over whether such licenses were actually allowed. And we learned nothing from that experience when it came to the COVID crisis. Millions of people around the world died needlessly from COVID for access to vaccines and to test kits that many Americans unfortunately took for granted. So let's be proactive and address this in APEP before the next crisis hits. And that last bullet there is a reference to explicitly removing any so-called TRIPS plus protections for big pharma from existing trade deals in the region. TRIPS plus means any sort of provision that goes beyond the already extremely stringent monopoly protections found in the World Trade Organization. And finally, let's not forget agriculture. Existing trade deals in the region favor the interests of big ag middlemen over family farmers and consumers. This is a really important issue for farmers in rural communities in the United States, and perhaps an even bigger deal for countries throughout Latin America, in which small-scale farming makes up an even larger percentage of the overall national economy in comparison to the US. So we're calling for APEP nations to seek ways to increase food security, to increase food sovereignty by striking deals that allow for the creation of strategic grain reserves, that allow for supply chain management policies, that allow for other public investment in domestic and regional agricultural resilience. And we also call on countries to do a better job of protecting consumer right to know, like country of origin labeling for meat and other goods and services. So, these are some of the things we think that APEP negotiators should be prioritizing. How can you make a difference on these issues? So towards the start, I mentioned that USTR has an open public comment period, explicitly asking how they can use APEP to promote labor, climate, and other goals. At this stage in APEP's process, this is the best, most direct way to share your thoughts with the APEP negotiators. And the easiest way for you to participate in the public comment period is through an online web tool with a template submission form that we put together. I'm going to ask Clayton to please paste the link to that tool in the chat now. If you haven't already, I encourage each of you to please take a moment now, click on that link, fill in your info, and hit submit. The comments are brief, top line items on the topics I just covered. And the more people who sign on to this submission, the clearer message it will send to the administration that these are the issues we want them to prioritize. Once you've taken action, you'll be brought to a thank you page. I believe you'll also receive a thank you email that will have links for you to share the action over social media, or if you're not on social media, to share the action via email. If you're able to do that, that's an important second step. Help spread the word. Of course, if you represent an organization or otherwise have a little more time on your hands, and you want to do a deeper dive with comments on one or more of these issues, on another issue, you can obviously submit unique comments of your own. The docket number for this public comment period is included on our web form. You can cut and paste that number into the search tool on the website regulations.gov, and the full docket should pull right up for you. If you're interested in doing that and you run into any trouble, just email us and we can walk you through that process. But whether you use our form or write comments of your own, the important thing is to make your voice heard and to do so relatively quickly, because unfortunately, the comment period for APEP's trade track closes this coming Monday, July 22nd. And I'll mention the next major round of APEP trade negotiations is August 1st and 2nd in Quito, Ecuador. So we want to get a lot of comments in before that and help steer the direction of these talks right from the start. So this last slide has our contact info. Just to recap, let me say again, APEP is not something we should think of as a single standalone trade agreement in and of itself. And under this administration, whatever deals APEP does generate are unlikely to include the traditional corporate giveaways that we've seen in trade agreements during past administrations. But whether APEP actually generates any agreements that are useful, whether we actually get a climate peace clause, an end to ISDS, an access to medicines agreement, a just critical minerals agreement, an agreement on migrant rights, like any of those things that would actually be useful and positive for people throughout the Americas. Whether or not we get those is going to depend on how consistently and how loudly we raise those issues. You know, we're at this point in US trade policy making where folks like you have done such an amazing job at calling out the harms of business as usual free trade agreements that policymakers are afraid to advance those types of trade deals anymore. Most policymakers are afraid that you are going to hold them accountable for these big mega deals. But what sort of arrangements replace those old failed deals, and how we go about ending the ongoing damage caused by existing agreements, those are the open questions that we all need to be weighing in on and making progress on. And this APEP public comment period is one place to start. So I appreciate your interest in this issue. I think at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we can take whatever questions people want to ask. Let's see here. So one question is that given that APEP is about both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, is there a way for it to take stances and enforcement that protect the ocean floor from critical mineral mining, or radical mineral mining? I will say absolutely. There are calls from environmental groups to protect the oceans in a lot of different ways through APEP. And one of the areas that people are focusing on very clearly is the critical minerals issue. I am not aware, you might be better aware than me, Mary, of what countries within APEP are engaging in oceanic critical mineral mining. But I'm fairly certain that this is an issue that will be coming up over the coming year. It's not one that I personally have a lot of experience in, but I know that a lot of our environmental partners are talking about this issue a lot more. So yeah, this is something I would be looking into in APEP and other critical minerals agreement contexts. Question to share the PowerPoint. Yes, we can definitely do that. There will be a follow-up email to this. They'll have a link to the video, the action tools, and we can include a PDF of the slides as well, I think pretty easily. Can Canadians use the public comment page? Canadians can use the public comment page. I think that I've heard that negotiators tend to give citizens a little bit more attention, but these are going to be big comments. So Canadian folks, please log on. And if you have trouble with the online tool, shoot us an email with your name and we can add you to the comments being submitted. So those are the questions in the Q&A. Let me just check the chat real quick and see if I've missed anything else.
It does look like Terry has their hand up. We can allow them to talk if you would like, or Terry, you can just put your question in the chat.
Sure, Clayton, I'll leave technical questions like that to you.
All right. Terry, you should be allowed to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question.
Oh, I didn't have a question, so I'm not sure how my hand ended up.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
well, you're all good.
No problem. Thanks for being here, Terry. If anyone else has a question, I guess you can raise your hand or put in the chat. In the meantime, I will remind you, please do sign Hillary's wedding card that's in the chat, the link for that. We'd love to have you on that card. We're going to be sending it to her tomorrow. She does such a wonderful job with these calls. Just want to give her our best. And then again, please especially, take action on the public comment period. And I think that's what we're gonna get to today. But thank you, everybody. We're gonna end it early. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next month. Take care.